Hello, I'm Steve Rollett, the Deputy Chief Executive at the Confederation of School Trusts. In this video, I'm delighted to be talking to Stuart Lock, who is the CEO of Advantage Schools. The background to our conversation is that Stuart wrote a really interesting piece in the local press over the summer about a new school that Advantage are establishing. And I thought it was a really interesting insight into the way that Stuart and his trust think and talk about their expectations for their schools. And as you'll hear, the notion of vision. The piece that Stuart wrote was aimed primarily at parents, and it sets out the things that Advantage wants the school to be about, what it wants the school to do for the local community. And I wanted to dig into this a little bit more to understand the rationale. In our conversation, we discuss something that Stuart calls the Sophie test. We talk about the extent to which the new school might be similar or different to other schools in the trust. And Stuart talks about why he thinks the existence of a strong trust board is so important. I hope this is of interest to you, and thank you for listening as I talk to Stuart Lock. Hi, Stuart.
Hi, Steve. Nice to see
you. Likewise, good to see you too. So there I was just flicking through the pages of I think it's the Dunstable Gazette a little while ago over the summer, and I saw a really interesting piece about a new school that Advantage Schools are going to be setting up. And I won't say a lot more about the piece in the newspaper, because actually what I'll do is I'll provide the link so that people can see it alongside our conversation today. But I really wanted to have a chat with you about it. So before I say anything else and sort of chuck you any tricky questions, I thought if you wouldn't mind, it'd be great just to hear a little bit about Advantage Schools and about the new school as well, just as a bit of background for us.
Of course, Steve. So I'm Stuart Lock. I'm the Chief Executive of Advantage Schools, and we're a small school trust based in Bedford. We run a primary and a secondary school. We have another school about to join us. And we really grew out of the feeling that in Bedford we could offer something a bit different and take a position for the benefit of parents and their families. And so we're part of the infrastructure, we're members of the Confederation School Trust, and we're part of the infrastructure of the region. And we're determined really to bring some options, some choices to families and to serve families in a way that I know that lots and lots of people up and down the country do, but perhaps we take some slightly different some different perspectives, which I'm sure we'll explore. And Housestone School is a new secondary free school for 11 to 18 year olds, which is opening in Houghton Regis. It's an area where the local population have been let down by a number of promises, and they talked to me about being let down by a number of promises that have been made. So we've had to be really careful about what we can promise them. And I think that's the article that you're referring to, as me saying this is how we already run our schools and how we promise to run the school that we're going to open in the area. It's a presumptive bid free school. So that means that the local authority decide who's going to run it, and the local authority take responsibility for building it. But once it is built, it's our responsibility to run it completely, and it's run like any other academy. So some of what you will have seen in the article, which was aimed at parents, was reflective of the things that we said we would try to do when we put the bid in about 2 years ago.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Stuart. And obviously I was a little bit cheeky saying I was flicking through the pages of the Dunstable Gazette for clarity. I saw it on Twitter. But what I really found fascinating about the article is I think, in setting out what a new school is going to be about, what it's going to be like at that new school, for me, I thought we did some really interesting things. And as you say, particularly looking at it from the perspective of a parent, one of the things that really struck me was this notion of, I think you called it the Sophie test. Would you be able to say just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. I think loads of professionals will agree with the Sophie test, and it's something that I think that we all aspire to. It's the idea that that whatever decisions we make or however we run our schools, if it's not good enough for our own children going to schools, then it's just not good enough for our schools at all. And I think that I would anticipate that everybody works in a school where either the Sophie test applies and they run the school as well as they would want for their own children, or they aspire to do so and they're improving a school to be good enough to be that good. But we articulate it like that. Sophie is a pupil at one of our schools. She is the daughter of one of the founding principal of our secondary school, and that's where the name Sophie comes from. And we were going to call it, another name test and so on, but the Sophie test just stuck, and it's stuck, and it's something that everybody in our organisation, in all of our schools, refers to. We often say, does it pass the Sophie test, when we're talking about, things that go on in our schools.
So it's not just a sort of an advertising thing, it's something that really informs the culture and the vision for the trust as well, then, I suppose, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, it's a shorthand for all sorts of things, but it really helps crystallise with colleagues when we're saying, does it pass the Sophie test, and if not, why not, and how do we need to change it so it does. So yeah, it's already the way we run our schools.
Really good. And then what struck me about that Sophie test is the things you talked about in it. You talked about 3 very specific things that I wanted you to really just explain for us a little bit, give us a bit more of the rationale. You talked about excellent behaviour, you talked about strong teaching, you talked about great extracurricular opportunities, and I suppose I was thinking, well, probably most all schools would say they want that for the children in their school, but I think I got the sense in the article where you felt it was really important for you to state those things up front, that there's something very important to that school and your trust. Do you want to say a little bit more about the rationale there?
Of course. Thank you. There are two things to really explore, I think. One is that I agree that nobody would disagree with me. Like, everybody wants good behaviour, strong teaching, and great extracurricular activities, which is the way I frame it for parents to hear, like what will happen in the school. But it's not necessarily the case that every school would prioritise those 3 things and say those 3 things as the first 3 that come to mind. And they really come from the position of our trust in the economy of schools. We run our schools to prioritise 3 things. There are 3 things that all of our schools share. And those 3 things are that we have very high expectations, including of outcomes, and we do it like properly. So it's not okay for us to get good outcomes by entering pupils for easy qualifications, or by hothousing pupils at the end of year 6 or year 10 and 11. Actually, it's really important that a great curriculum leads to great outcomes, and we have high expectations, full stop. And that kind of comes across the behavioural thing that we talked about, but it also comes across the great teaching as well. The second thing is that we expect leaders to take responsibility in our schools. This means I expect leaders in our schools to be, and we expect leaders in our schools to be, highly visible, to ensure that all pupils can behave. For me, going back to the Sophie test, when I send my children to school, there are a couple of things I worry about. One is whether they get bullied, frankly, and I think all parents share that concern. And the second for me is that they might have some of their learning time stolen by badly managed behaviour, and I think leaders need to take responsibility for making sure that we manage behaviour well. And so that's really important to me, and something that we prioritise in our schools. And the third thing is that we employ people that do their job well. That refers to, like, I think everyone would say that, but what I mean by that is that implicitly, if somebody isn't doing their job well, we need to make sure that they are able to do their job well, and that they're supported to do so, and so on. But also that we have standards that we adhere to. And those are the things we talk about when we talk to our schools, the professionals that work in our schools, that's what we hold ourselves to account for. That's what my trustees hold me to account for. That really, like, if I said it in those words to parents, it kind of seems a bit less tangible. So I've brought it out tangibly as like what parents can expect us to experience. And so it came out in those 3 things, which we already offer in our schools as they are, and which I'm confident that we can offer in Housestone School.
Brilliant, thanks, Stuart. And so, that Sophie test, those 3 things you talked about, is that vision, or is vision something else?
It's a really difficult question. So, I'm not sure. And what I mean by that is that, like, when I did my NPQH, I was asked, like, I was told we had to have a vision, and I remember that they said in 10 minutes we're going to come around and ask you for your vision, and it had to be like a pithy phrase or something like that. And everybody just said like things that nobody disagreed with. Everybody just said, I can't really remember, like success for all, or like the best in you, or like fulfilling potential, or something like that. And maybe there was a bit more than that. Other people talk about vision being how we want the school to be in 5 years' time, or in 10 years' time, and maybe there is something in that. I just am cautious about using the word vision, because my experience is that people in my position, when they're confronted with really difficult questions of school improvement or how to run schools, can often retreat to questions of vision and sometimes values, which are a bit nebulous, no one disagrees with, and kind of get you out of a sticky situation without actually specifying how we're going to either address the significant areas of school improvement or run the school really well. And so I try to avoid, like, I can't say I never use the word vision, but I try to avoid the word vision without defining what I mean by vision, i.e. this is what I want the school to be like in 3-5 years time, whatever it might be. I think the word vision can sometimes be a nebulous word that doesn't specify what we mean.
That's great, thank you very much, Stuart. Another question for you then. Having been around Bedford Free School, and I have to say, really impressed by what I saw at BFS. You know, left a real mark on me actually. How similar will Housestone be to what I saw at BFS?
Interesting. Thank you for what you said about Bedford Free School. It's a controversial school for those people who haven't been around it, and often less controversial when people visit, I think. And I hope that it's a manifestation of the three things that I talked about at the start of this interview, that we expect have very high expectations, including of outcomes via a curricular focus, that we do it properly, that we expect leaders to take responsibility, and that includes for making sure that teachers can teach and pupils can learn, and that we employ people that do their job well and develop them if they're not doing their job well enough. And I think that manifests itself in Bedford Free School, but the way, and in all of our schools. But Bedford Free School, for example, has, you know, like as you go around, the first thing you notice, I think, is silent corridors. Like, if the question is at Housestone, will we be mandating silent corridors? The answer is no. Like, but what we will be doing is expecting Housestone to have very purposeful transitions, because we want to maximise learning time, because we expect leaders to take responsibility, and so on. So we expect those three things that I talked about. I do believe that principals, head teachers, and the implementation of kind of the what we sort of nebulously described as our vision, or, you know, the excellence that we expect. Like, I think it's really important that head teachers work through that with their senior team and with their staff, and I think implementation is vital. So I can't tell you exactly how similar or different Housestone will be, but what I can tell you is that in getting Bedford Free School to be the genuinely outstanding and school that I think it is, and that Ofsted have agreed it is, and that we're very proud of, we made a number of mistakes, and we'll learn from those. You know, we've had 3 different curricular approaches at Bedford Free School since it opened in 2012. We probably won't have 3 different curricular approaches at Housestone School. We will leverage some of the economies of scale. I don't really mean in terms of money and all that boring stuff, but I mean in terms of like curricular expertise that we can operate between the 2 schools. And so there'll be a number of things that we learn from our existing school, but there's huge scope for the principal and the senior team and the staff to make it their school, alongside the families and the local governing bodies that we genuinely believe in and we think can have a significant input into the quality of the school. So I've said this to the community in Houghton Regis. I've said that I can't tell you exactly what every aspect of the school will look like, because I'm not going to be the head teacher or the principal, but I can tell you the things that I can promise you, and those are the things that we've talked about, the Sophie test and the things that my trust stands for.
Thanks, Stuart. Again, really interesting answer, and I particularly like what you did is you sort of challenged, I think, sometimes that we get in that binary, you know, should there be everything dictated centrally, or should there be complete autonomy? And I think you're trying to provide in a sense, a mental model for helping schools and the leaders to navigate when that decision's what framework they're being made within, rather than just prescribing this should be done autonomously or this should be done centrally. I think that was really interesting.
And the thing I'd add actually to that is that often we talk about the kind of challenge, or where head teachers can just make decisions, but in reality that's not how things work. Like, my head teachers are always making decisions, getting challenges from me where we're like, I'm 70% sure about that, convince me more, or I challenge them back, I'm like, I'm not sure about that at all, but I'm going to go with you because you're the principal or head teacher, but here's my concerns, or where I think there's a difficulty, and they'll challenge back and we have the discussion. And that's generally how it works. Like, you don't have a kind of I make the decision or they make the decision. You have we've got a range of expertise, and more information allows us to make a better bet.
That's great, thank you. And So you talked about Housestone, really excited about the new school. Just tell us a little bit about. So we've got a trust here that's growing. It's, as you say, got fantastic reputation already. It's growing. Where does it go from here? Where does it stop, or what's the destination?
Yeah, it's really hard to know, but my bet on the system, if you like, is, I mean, we're going from 2 schools to 4 schools. I think that trusts of our size are really quite vulnerable, and I mean vulnerable in many ways, but so it feels to me like there needs to be some rationalization of that. And so actually one of the reasons for picking up our, here's the things we stand for and that we don't negotiate on, the 3 things that I keep repeating to you, is because like we're really open to working with other schools, other trusts, in terms of making sure that we can do that even better by becoming a different organisation, by bringing them in. So Advantage Schools will be a different Advantage Schools as a result of Housestone School and the other school that's about to join us. It'll be a different organisation because it'll bring strengths, it'll bring more knowledge, and it'll be able to make better bets. And I'm sure that across the system that trusts of our size, trusts of kind of 4, 5, 6 schools, like getting to that kind of sustainable 12, 15 schools as a school trust, while keeping quality, is really hard. And I think loads of schools loads of trusts, have found it really difficult to get through that kind of barrier, that process. It feels to me like kind of planning to get through there and being sustainable, like by genuinely becoming a better organization for the pupils and families that you serve. Like it feels like we have to embrace that rationalization. And it's no surprise, I saw the Secretary of State spoke to the CST, wasn't it actually, where he said like the ambition for kind of every school to be in a strong trust. Like I think that's probably, like, and I talk as someone who used to be in the Anti-Academies Alliance like years and years ago, but now like that's the past, right? Like if we're going to serve families across the country better, it feels to me like we're going to have to rationalize the system significantly. So to answer your question, like I anticipate that in a few years' time there'll be a much smaller number of strong school trusts that offer some choice, but that are working, a sustainable model, and we move into the kind of like, here's how we improve the system. In some ways, I'm not bothered if one of those is called Advantage Schools or not. I am bothered that one of them stands for the things that I've outlined to you and does the things I'm really proud that we do already. And to me, one of my jobs is to make sure that the approach that we take to education, which I think has improved a number of schools across the country, and people tell me it has via visiting and so on, is an approach that still exists in the system and does so, like particularly in the area in which we work, Bedford and Central Bedfordshire.
Great, thanks, Stuart. Fascinating. Look, I could listen to you all day with this stuff, but I've got a final question for you, which is, we talked about this from the perspective of parents. We've talked about it from your perspective as CEO. Just wondered if you'd say a little bit about the role of the trust board here in terms of the new school, but also the trust as a whole, because I think that's the case you've just made really compellingly there, is that the trust isn't just the sum of its parts. It's not just the individual schools. There is it is an entity itself, and it changes, but it is also changed by what happens within the trust.
That's right.
Could you say a little bit more about the role of the trust board at Advantage and the role it's playing in your strategic journey?
So the trust boards, the first thing about the trust board is they're not just volunteers who fancy doing something else to give back to the community. I think that people that do that are really valuable and bring something that's really important locally. But actually, we appointed our trust board to be people who are going to be highly accountable for what is a multi-million-pound organisation providing a public service. And so we looked for skilled people and, frankly, the best people who in the country, and possibly some of them outside the country. So we went for people who have educational expertise, business expertise, legal expertise, etc., etc. We had, and so I have a wealth of support, knowledge, experience to call on at any point that I need to, and I do. And I think that relationship with the board has been useful. I trust them, and I believe that they trust me, but that's come about because we run our schools competently and well. And so we've kind of earned that relationship's been earned from both sides. In terms of opening the new school, the trust board, like, they looked through the bid, they supported me through the bid and so on, but they're really clear. This is what our trust stands for. Like I've outlined it to you. Like my job is to execute their strategy. That's, Chief Executive Officer. And so, like, and okay, the strategy comes about through a partnership between the board and the CEO. Practically that's how it often works, but of course it is the trust board's responsibility to hand down the strategy to be executed, for me to implement, I suppose. And so when it comes to the new school, we have a subcommittee of the board that reports to the board. Like basically everything's going okay, but they spend every 3 weeks a couple of hours with my chief operating officer, who is the project manager for the new school, and often with me or with the director of education, like to talk about the aspects of the school, to make sure that they're happy that we're making sufficient progress, that we're on top of the possible risks, and to make sure that we are as likely as possible to open the school in the manner that we are promising and anticipate doing so. And I mean, they're super demanding in a way that I really welcome, and I think helps me to do my job better. And what I mean by that is that I think that they'll be disappointed if it isn't one of the very best schools in the country from the minute it opens, because of the experience we've got of learning from our mistakes, of the expertise, of the capacity they've allowed me to build and supported me in building in the executive team, and the experience of having 2 really well run schools already that can contribute kind of expertise, perspectives, partnerships, etc., etc. So we're in a strong position. The answer to you is that the trust board, I think the summary of the answer is the trust board are interested strategically in making sure that we have the biggest impact possible on families in terms of the quality of education, particularly those families that might not have had access to good education otherwise. That's what they're most interested in, and they're interested in us doing that to as many families as we can without compromising on quality. And they always talk to me about where's the next step, what's next, where are we going, and forcing me to get my head up from where are the schools at the moment to where are they going to be in 2-3 years, and where's the trust going to have more influence.
That's fascinating. Thanks, Stuart. And what's really interesting, I guess, is you've talked about the board and to some degree like the top level sort of intent from the board. And as you were talking about it, and you were talking about particularly wanting to make a difference for children who may otherwise not have that quality of education, and to sort of bring it back round in the loop, does that take us back then to the Sophie test and the things we talked about at the start?
So I think so. I think the trustees are like that. I mean, I would like, it's not all about meetings, but I think it does. I think the Sophie test is crucial, although the trust board never really call it the Sophie test. That's kind of the fingertip kind of phrase that we use in our schools. And I think I just referred to trust meetings. I should say that like my trust meetings are things that I don't look forward to. I don't look forward to them at all. On the days of trust meetings, I get a knot in my stomach and so on, and I always get very significant challenge on the things that they problematize that I haven't found, or often I know they're coming because they foreshadowed them for me, members of the trustees, but I'm always better at my job as a result. And I never think that I never have the thing about my job's my job's on the line or anyone's out to get me. It's always that we've appointed trustees who are determined to make the trust better and to serve families better, which does come back to the Sophie test. And that's why they can give me a hard time, or I can find the meetings difficult, because we have real expertise, and I would encourage all trusts to try and appoint those. It's really hard to find great people, but with time and so on, who are willing to do it on a voluntary basis. But if you can, it can really add to the quality of the schools that you run, and I think that we've hit that with my trust board.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stuart. Good governance, a wonderful note for us to end on. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today, and huge thanks for giving up your time, and the very, very best of luck and best wishes to Advantage, to the schools that you already have, and then the Housestone School as well. And at some point, I hope that I'll be able to come along and have a look around and let you know the answer to the question is how similar is this to BFE?
Wonderful. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the support from you, Leora, and the team at CST.
Thank you.